Durante décadas, Richard Gere siempre ha sido una estrella de Hollywood conocida por impresionar a la audiencia con su belleza y talento. Sin embargo, su reciente revelación a los 74 años sorprendió a sus fanáticos. Se informó que Gere admitió que una mujer en particular ostentaba el título de amor de su vida. Antes de ahondar en esta sentida confesión, echemos un vistazo a la vida temprana de Richard Gere, junto con su audaz historia romántica. Richard Gere, nacido el 31 de agosto de 1949 en Filadelfia, Pensilvania, fue el segundo de 5 hijos. Sus padres, Doris Anna Tiffany y Homer George, también eran descendientes del Mayflower. Sin embargo, su carrera se desarrolló en torno a la música, ya que tocaba instrumentos y escribía música para obras escolares. A pesar de esto, su camino cambió después de la escuela secundaria. Aunque tenía una beca de gimnasia en la Universidad de Massachusetts en Amherst y estaba estudiando filosofía, el deseo de Gere de actuar prevaleció. Estuvo en la universidad durante 2 años antes de conseguir el papel principal en la producción londinense de Grease en 1973. Aceptó otros papeles, incluido La fierecilla domada, que lo ayudaron a impulsar su carrera como actor. La primera película de Gere fue Report to the Commissioner en 1977. Más tarde consiguió un papel en Buscando al Señor Goldbar y al año siguiente le siguieron Días del Cielo y American Gigolo. Estar en el set de An Officer and a Gentleman era como interpretar a un candidato a oficial naval. Su carrera despegó cuando protagonizó películas como Pretty Woman, Fear y Runaway Bride. También ganó premios importantes, como el Globo de Oro por Chicago en 2002. A lo largo de sus años en la industria cinematográfica, recibió reconocimientos que demostraron su importancia en el campo. Fue nominado a premios como el Primetime Emmy y varios Globos de Oro. También fue incluido entre las 50 personas más bellas del mundo por la revista People. Esto lo llevó a aparecer en las portadas de muchas publicaciones. Sin embargo, su viaje no estuvo exento de desafíos. A pesar del éxito inicial en Buscando al Señor Goldbar en 1977, Gere también experimentó reveses. Uno de estos episodios fue cuando fue reemplazado en Los Amos de Flatbush después de una disputa con su coprotagonista Sylvester Stallone. A fines de la década de 1970, interpretó el papel de una víctima del Holocausto en Bent, una película ambientada en una época en la que la sociedad no era tan abierta hacia las personas LGBTQ como lo es hoy. Asumir un papel tan poco convencional fue una decisión arriesgada y podría haber resultado en críticas negativas. Podría haber arruinado su carrera si no hubiera sido bien recibida o si se hubiera considerado demasiado controvertida. Sin embargo, su actuación en Bent mostró hasta dónde estaba dispuesto a llegar y lo flexible que era. Afirmó su dedicación a la diversidad de contenido y a dar profundidad a personajes complejos. Además, películas como American Gigolo 1980 y Un Oficial continuaron desarrollando su carrera. Un Oficial y Un Caballero 1982 no estuvo exenta de desafíos. Conseguir el éxito de taquilla y elegir papeles que tuvieran eco en el público fue un reto importante. La lucha constante por equilibrar el éxito comercial con la realización artística fue un problema importante al que Gere tuvo que enfrentarse en su carrera. Además de estos problemas externos, Richard Gere también tuvo que lidiar con problemas internos en su vida personal. La fama de sus aventuras extramatrimoniales, así como sus numerosas relaciones, tuvieron un impacto significativo tanto en su vida personal como en su floreciente carrera. Estuvo en una relación con la actriz estadounidense Penelope Milford de 1971 a 1978. Estuvieron juntos desde principios hasta finales de la década de 1970. Esta relación fue solo un capítulo, pero Gere también tuvo otras relaciones de corta duración durante ese tiempo. Otro ejemplo fue su romance con la pintora brasileña Silvia Martins, desde finales de los años 70 hasta mediados de los 80. Fue esta relación con Martins la que llevó a Gere a viajar a Nepal en 1978, donde conoció a monjes y lamas tibetanos. Este fue un punto de inflexión en su vida que determinó su interés por el budismo, llevándolo a convertirse en practicante budista tibetano, específicamente de la escuela Gelug, y un firme partidario del Dalai Lama. Sin embargo, la vida romántica de Gere no terminó allí. Después de su ruptura con Sylvia, salió con otra actriz estadounidense, Tuesday Weld, quien era una actriz retirada conocida por sus papeles en cine y televisión. Su relación se limitó a ese año. Jere también tuvo una conexión con Carol Mallory, quien fue modelo y actriz a principios de los años 70. Su relación comenzó en 1970 y duró hasta 1975. Este periodo con Mallory fue otro capítulo importante en la vida personal de Jere. Mallory, más conocida por su carrera como modelo y actriz, compartió su experiencia con Jere en su novela El fantasma de Picasso. Lo describió como un amante legendario e inolvidable, confirmando su flexibilidad, sensibilidad y amabilidad. Esta descripción fortaleció la imagen de Jere como un símbolo carismático que sigue encantando a sus parejas. Continuando con su activa vida amorosa, Jere se involucró con Don Steele entre 1975 y 1978. Este periodo fue significativo porque Steele más tarde se convertiría en una exitosa ejecutiva de Hollywood, alcanzando prominencia en la industria cinematográfica. Mientras estaban juntos, Steele todavía estaba construyendo su carrera en el cine. Para entonces, había formado una empresa con su primer marido y explorado varias empresas emprendedoras. Esta relación con Jere sirvió como una introducción informal a Hollywood para Steele y terminó justo cuando su participación profesional en la industria cinematográfica comenzaba a despegar. La carrera de Steele en Hollywood ganó impulso en 1978 cuando aceptó un trabajo como directora de marketing en Paramount Pictures. Este papel la llevó a trabajar en películas notables y, finalmente, a la presidencia de Columbia Pictures, convirtiéndose en la primera mujer en dirigir un importante estudio cinematográfico en los Estados Unidos. La asociación de Jere con Steele, aunque breve de 1975 a 1978, fue una parte importante de su vida. A mediados y finales de la década de 1970, mientras intentaba avanzar en su carrera como actor y sus intereses artísticos, sus conexiones dentro de la industria cinematográfica también se destacaron, especialmente considerando la futura prominencia de Steele. Sin embargo, la activa vida amorosa de Jere continuó. Priscilla Presley es otro nombre vinculado a él. Aunque se informó de un breve encuentro en 1983, según una reveladora autobiografía escrita por el exmarido de Priscilla, Mac Edwards, Presley supuestamente confesó haber tenido un romance de una noche con Edwards. Edwards afirmó que Priscilla se lo reveló durante una conversación, diciendo, «Oh, es un hombre maravilloso». Luego le preguntó, «¿Te acostaste con él?» Y ella dijo, «Sí, nos acostamos». Él le preguntó, «¿Cuántas veces?» Y ella respondió, «Solo una vez». Luego le preguntó qué había pasado y ella le dijo, «Nos conocimos en una fiesta y conectamos. Nos lo pasamos genial y terminamos en la cama juntos».
Eu acendi uma fogueira. Nye, uma professora, subiu para tomar banho. Paul, um educador formado em Yale, Harvard e na Universidade de Columbia, estava sentado lá embaixo. De repente, algo entrou pela janela. Então uma segunda bala entrou. Houve um barulho e vidro quebrando. Paul gritou um aviso para Nye. Abaixem-se! Alguém está atirando! Então ouvi outro estrondo, um estalo, e me virei, eu literalmente vi o batente da porta se estilhaçar. Então ela gritou com você, certo? Alguém está atirando lá em cima. Tudo acabou em questão de minutos. Ninguém ficou ferido. Você se sente sortudo? Sim. Com certeza. Os detetives entrevistaram os White e os ocupantes das outras casas atacadas. Não parecia haver nenhuma conexão entre eles. Nenhum dos moradores, segundo os investigadores, tinha qualquer ligação com Kevin. Mas os cartuchos de todos os tiroteios contariam mais tarde uma história diferente. Quando os projéteis foram enviados ao laboratório, todos correspondiam aos projéteis encontrados na cena do crime. As cápsulas eram iguais, mas Kevin foi a única pessoa morta. Os detetives não sabiam o porquê. Poderia ter sido um incidente de raiva ao volante que se tornou fatal? Ou Kevin já era o alvo? O acidente de carro foi proposital, para tirar você do veículo. Provável. Parecia planejado. Se ele era o alvo específico, o que aconteceu em sua vida para alguém fazer isso? Já era tarde quando os detetives Ezzy e Cunningham deixaram a cena do crime em 6 de fevereiro. Eles foram até a casa de Kevin Jean para encontrar um parente e notificá-lo sobre o que havia acontecido. Sua mãe, Linda, abriu a porta. Essa deve ser a conversa mais difícil. Isso é. Elas sempre são. Olá, mãe. Feliz aniversário. Você tem que ser direto e honesto, deixando claro não importa o quão horrível seja. Eles explicaram a ele que Kevin havia sido baleado e morto na área de Lawrence e Nichols Street, em New Haven. Eu conseguiria entender isso? Fiquei absolutamente arrasada. Ele caiu no chão, chorando. Os detetives queriam saber tudo sobre Kevin e por que ele poderia ter sido o alvo naquela noite. Linda começou a contar-lhe sobre seu filho. Eram só eles dois. E ele a apoiou. Ela nos contou que ele era estudante de pós-graduação na Universidade de Yale e estava na Guarda Nacional do Exército. Kevin era profundamente religioso. Ele e sua mãe faziam parte da congregação da Igreja Batista Trinity. O pastor Gregory Hendrickson conhecia os dois e disse que Linda, uma mãe solteira divorciada, ajudou Kevin a superar uma infância difícil, na qual ele era frequentemente vítima de bullying. Ela estava muito comprometida em ajudá-lo a progredir e, com o tempo, ele prosperou. Acho que ele tinha um senso de honra à mãe, assim como ela cuidou dele quando ele era criança, ele queria cuidar dela quando ela crescesse. Kevin comprou esta casa em 2019 e Hendrickson disse que convidou sua mãe para morar com ele. Ela morava sozinha, do outro lado do país. Ela não tinha muito apoio familiar e ele queria que ela fosse ficar.
And now, Malcolm was giving him the perfect chance to ruin him, so Deacon Russell fed into it. He didn't tell Malcolm to be careful. He didn't tell Malcolm to trust his wife. Instead, he leaned in. I believe you, Malcolm. I've seen it too. Sharon is hiding something. And then he took it further. He created a fake video, carefully edited, spliced together, manipulated, a video that showed Sharon secretly meeting with Dr. Kenneth Moore, the ex-husband of Malcolm's former girlfriend, Michelle Carter. It was convincing. The lighting was dim, the angles were just right, and most importantly, it looked real. And once the video was done, it started to spread. At first, just a few whispers, a few text messages. Did you see the video of Pastor Wright's wife? Then it spread like wildfire. Phones buzzed, screens lit up. People sent it to each other, showed it to their spouses, and suddenly Sharon Wright, the woman everyone had looked up to, was the center of a church scandal. But Sharon didn't even know it yet, because Malcolm found out first. One evening, a church member pulled him aside after a meeting. "Pastor, I don't know how to tell you this, but you need to see something." He pressed play, and there it was, Sharon meeting with another man, laughing, talking, touching his arm. This was it, the proof he had been waiting for. His hands shook as he watched. It didn't matter that he hadn't actually caught her in the act. It didn't matter that, deep down, something about the video didn't feel quite right. It looked fake, but he didn't care. Because in Malcolm's mind, this was all the confirmation he needed. His wife was a liar. His wife was unfaithful, and now the whole church knew it too. He went home that night, but he didn't confront Sharon. He didn't ask her if it was real. He didn't even give her a chance to defend herself because Malcolm had already decided he wasn't going to handle this in private. No, that wasn't enough. Sharon had humiliated him, and now he was going to humiliate her back. So he started planning the perfect moment, the perfect way to expose her. The perfect way to make sure everyone in that church knew what kind of woman she really was. Sunday service, in front of the entire congregation, that was when he was going to do it. That was when he was going to press play, and that was when the truth would come crashing down. But Malcolm had no idea what would happen next. Sunday morning arrived. The church was packed, filled with families, elders, choir members, and visitors who had no idea that today's service would be anything but ordinary. People shook hands, exchanged warm smiles, and settled into their seats, expecting the usual message of faith and redemption. Sharon sat in the front row like she always did, her hands resting on her lap, her Bible beside her. She had no idea that this morning, her world was about to collapse around her. She looked up at Malcolm as he stepped up to the pulpit, the man she had stood beside for 15 years, the man she had defended, prayed for, and love through every season of their marriage. She listened as he took a deep breath, gripping the edges of the podium. His voice was steady, but there was something in his tone, something so heavy. He cleared his throat, looked out at the congregation, scanning the faces of people who trusted him, people who believed every word that came out of his mouth. Then he began. At first, it sounded like a normal sermon. He preached about faith and endurance, and the congregation listened closely, nodding along. But then something changed. His tone shifted, and the energy in the room tightened. The sermon, once about faith, suddenly took a different turn. Some of you, Malcolm said, his voice growing heavier with every word, have been living in deceit. Some of you have broken your vows and betrayed the people who trust you the most. The congregation stirred. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Then Malcolm did something he never does, he stopped preaching. He looked up directly at Sharon. The air in the sanctuary became thick. Sharon's body stiffened. There is something the church needs to know, Malcolm said, his voice loud and firm. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Then he did the unthinkable. He turned to the entire church and made the accusation. Dr. Kenneth Moore, you and my wife have betrayed me, and worst of all, betrayed this congregation. A heavy silence crashed over the church. Sharon's chest tightened. Her lips parted in shock. Her body froze. Gasps spread through the congregation. People turned, staring at Sharon and Dr. Moore. The whispers grew louder, but Sharon let him finish everything he had to say. Then she stood. That's not true. She shouted. I have never. Malcolm, I have never been unfaithful to you. The church was now filled with hushed chaos. Some people were whispering in confusion, others were shaking their heads. Some believed Malcolm, some didn't. Sharon's eyes searched Malcolm's face, but the man staring back at her was not the husband she once knew. You deny it? Malcolm asked, his voice steady, cold. I deny it because it isn't true. Sharon's voice cracked, but it was strong. I don't know what this is, but I know it's a lie. But Malcolm had already made up his mind. Without another word, he pressed a button. The large church screen lit up, and then the video played. The footage was grainy, low quality, but there she was, Sharon sitting beside another man, laughing, leaning close. The congregation gasped. Some covered their mouths, others looked away, unable to believe what they were seeing. Sharon's breath stopped. Her body went numb. She had never seen this video before. Then Dr. Moore stood up. His voice boomed through the sanctuary. This is a lie. Dr. Moore, filled with anger, shouted. This video. It's fake. He yelled. I have nothing to do with your wife, and I never met her like this. This is not real. The confusion thickened. And then another voice rose from the back, a woman, a church member, and she said what no one else dared to say. She stepped forward. That video is fake, she said. I have seen the original video before, on the internet. Same clothes, same spot, but not Sharon and Dr. Moore. It was someone else. This video is digitally altered, she added. Then she pulled her phone from her bag, searched for the original video, and played it. One of the elders in the church had asked the media team to connect her phone to the big screen so the entire church could see the original video. The church was stunned when they discovered the video their pastor played was fake. Then another voice rose above the noise. A man stood up from the back of the church. There's something you all need to hear. The room grew silent. Every eye in the sanctuary turned toward him. The tension was thick, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. The man was no stranger to this church. He was not just another member of the congregation. He was an ex-private investigator, a man who spent years uncovering the truth in cases others wanted to keep hidden. He stepped forward, his expression serious, his voice firm. I didn't plan to say anything, he admitted, but after what just happened here today, I can't stay quiet anymore. Sharon gripped the pew in front of her. Her entire body felt weak, as if she already knew that whatever was about to be said would change everything. The man looked at Malcolm, then at the congregation. There was a day, he began, when my wife and I decided to take a short trip. We went to the next town for the weekend, just a little getaway, nothing out of the ordinary. But while we were parking at our hotel, something caught my attention. I saw Pastor Malcolm Wright, but he wasn't alone. The church listened, frozen. He was with Danielle Foster. They were leaving the hotel parking lot together, getting into the same car. He paused, then continued. I remember asking my wife, "Did you see that, Pastor Malcolm?" And Danielle, "What are they doing at a hotel?" But I told myself, no, I must be mistaken. I didn't want to believe it, so I let it go. The investigator took a slow breath, his eyes scanning the church, watching the way people were processing his words. But then something else happened. There was another evening. I was leaving a restaurant, and I saw them again. Pastor Malcolm and Danielle, talking, standing close, laughing. He paused. I told myself again, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm reading too much into this. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He looked around the church. And as a member of this congregation, I needed to be sure. I needed to know if the man standing before us every Sunday, the man leading us in prayer, preaching about faith, family, and righteousness, was actually living by the words he preached. So, I started watching him. I have been watching Pastor Malcolm Wright for weeks, he said, his voice cutting through the air. And I know the real truth. The church was stunned. Murmurs broke out again. Some people leaned forward, others exchanged worried glances. Malcolm's hands gripped the pulpit, his pulse pounding in his ears. His throat was dry. Sharon stared at the man, her grip tightening. The investigator didn't stop. He walked toward the media team, pulling out his phone. He handed it to one of the church's technicians. Connect this to the screen, he instructed. The screen flickered back to life, and then the video played. Malcolm at a park with Danielle Foster. The next clip appeared, Malcolm and Danielle sitting close at a restaurant, their hands brushing, their faces too near. Then another, a hotel entrance, Malcolm and Danielle stepping inside together. The church erupted. People rose from their seats. Some whispered in disbelief, others shook their heads. A few pointed at the screen, their voices rising over one another. Sharon's hands went cold. Her body was still. She didn't need any more proof. Her husband was the real cheater all along. Then another person stood up. Dr. Kenneth Moore, the man Malcolm had falsely accused of having an affair with Sharon, stepped forward, his face firm. I warned you, he said, looking directly at Malcolm. I told you to be careful of Michelle Carter, and you didn't listen. Because while you were accusing Sharon of something she never did, you were sneaking around with your ex. The congregation was stunned. Sharon turned to Malcolm, her face blank, drained of any emotion. She had nothing left to say. She watched Malcolm, the man who stood in front of this church and humiliated her, the man who called her a liar. Now, he was the one caught. The whispers spread. People no longer talked about Sharon. Now, they talked about Malcolm. One of the elders stood, his face tight with anger and disappointment. The murmur in the church slowly faded as he stepped forward, commanding silence. Without saying a word, his eyes locked onto Malcolm, and the weight of his authority settled over the room. Pastor Wright, he said, his voice steady but filled with finality. You have left us no choice. You are to step down immediately. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Some expected it, others didn't, but no one spoke against it. No one defended Malcolm. He had lost them. He gripped the pulpit as if holding on to it might keep him standing, might keep him from sinking under the reality of what had just happened. Sharon didn't say a word. She didn't plead for justice, didn't demand an apology. She just picked up her purse, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the doors. She didn't stop. She didn't look back. The sound of her heels clicking against the church floor was the only thing anyone heard until the doors swung open and closed behind her. Danielle Foster's husband followed soon after, his face hard, unreadable, but his hands clenched at his sides. He didn't stay long enough to listen to Malcolm's excuses, didn't wait for any explanation. He refused to stay in a place where his wife's betrayal had become public knowledge. And Michelle Carter, she sat frozen in her seat, her hands gripping the edge of the pew. Shame clung to her like a heavy coat. She didn't speak, didn't try to justify anything. She knew there was nothing left to say. Malcolm stood alone. The congregation stared at him, some in disbelief, others in disgust. They turned away, one by one, some shaking their heads, others walking out. This is the moment Malcolm Wright realized he had lost everything: his marriage, his position, his respect. And the worst part? He did it to himself. That evening, Sharon didn't return home. She went straight to her sister's house. She needed to be somewhere safe, somewhere away from the memories, the humiliation, the betrayal. A few weeks later, she filed for divorce. She didn't hesitate. She could never stay with a man who stood before an entire church and tried to destroy her reputation when, in reality, he was the one being unfaithful all along. She didn't care what people said. She didn't care about saving face. What mattered was that she was done with Malcolm Wright. As for Danielle, the consequences of that Sunday morning followed her like a shadow. Her husband refused to take her back. She lost the support of the church community, and the whispers didn't stop. She had nowhere to turn, no one to run to. But sadly, the next day, the news spread. On Sunday evening, Danielle was found lifeless, lying still. She had taken something her body couldn't handle. The shame, the loss, the weight of her choices, it was too much. Some say she couldn't bear the embarrassment. Others believe she had nowhere left to go. Whatever the reason, one thing is clear: one moment of betrayal led to consequences that could never be undone. Malcolm Wright is left in ruins. He walked into church that morning believing he was in control, convinced that his plan would bring him justice. But what he didn't realize was that the truth always finds a way out. He stood on that pulpit, pointing fingers, making accusations, and shaming his wife in front of the entire congregation, only for the truth to turn back on him. He didn't just lose his marriage, his church, and his position. He lost the one thing he had spent his life building, his reputation. The doors that were once open to him shut. The pulpit he once stood behind was taken away. 15 years of work, of influence, of respect, all destroyed in a single day. And now, standing in the ruins of the life he destroyed with his own hands, Malcolm is left with a question only he can answer: was it paranoia that led him down this path, or was it guilt? Did he accuse Sharon because he truly believed she was unfaithful, or was it because he knew, deep down, that he was the one who had broken their vows first? One moment of anger, one moment of pride, one moment of deception, that's all it took for Malcolm to lose everything. And now, I ask you, if you were Sharon, how would you have handled this? Would you have walked away like she did? Would you have confronted Malcolm differently? And do you think he got what he deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear what you think. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to stay updated. In the next story, we're revealing another case of deception, a case so shocking, so devastating, it will leave you speechless. You won't want to miss it. Click here now to watch.